Good morning. Welcome to our 2019 Title IIA Technical Assistance webinar. Before we get started, if someone wouldn't mind just putting in the chat that you can hear me, then I'll know I'm not just talking to myself. Great. Excellent. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have some other folks join us. My name is Sarah Martin. I am an education specialist here at the Department of Education, supporting Title IIA, and I have two colleagues in the room with me today, Tanya Friesendahl, who many of you know through the Oregon Mentor Project and other various excellent work, and Joni Gillis, who is our private school ombudsperson. So both of them are here today helping as your questions come in and supporting the webinar in a technical capacity. Which apparently I need because it won't advance the slide. Hold on one moment, please. There we go. Apparently I have to go manual. It doesn't like the arrow keys. Thanks again for joining us today. We know your time is really valuable and we appreciate you spending some of it with us. We are recording this webinar, so if you have colleagues who cannot attend, they'll be able to access the information online. Our outcomes for today, we've been doing a great deal of work at the department in the last year to 18 months around really getting more cohesive in our supports and being intentional about how we connect the asks that we make of districts. And so as we go through our webinar today, we're going to be talking about Title IIA through the filter of continuous improvement and trying to draw some connections between the work you're already doing in your continuous improvement planning and how it can feed the requests that come as part of the Title IIA application. We're also going to kind of recalibrate or make sure we're on the same page regarding private schools and requirements for equitable services and that sort of thing. And then provide a quick update on allocations and, of course, as always, answer your questions. It does look like everyone has muted themselves. Thank you very much. And we do have Tanya monitoring the chat. I'll try to remember to stop periodically to ask for questions, and we do have a place at the end for questions as well, and you're welcome to type those into the chat, or if you want to ask a question out loud, when we pause, go ahead and unmute yourself for that purpose. We talk about this slide every year when we do our webinar, just kind of ground ourselves in the purpose of Title IIA, which is really about improving outcomes for students through ensuring that they have equitable access to excellent educators. And that includes, of course, teachers, principals, other school leaders, making sure that we are providing all students with teachers that are prepared to meet their needs and help them succeed in college and career. The guidance that we often refer to when you come up with your excellent questions was rewritten several years ago under the reauthorization of ESEA under ESSA. And it really focuses, even its title tells us that it really focuses on systems, looking at systems of support for educators, supporting educators across the continuum of their careers, and thinking about how to maximize the use of Title IIA funds to really ensure that we use them strategically and for greater impact. That's a quote right out of the guidance. So we have been working over the last 2 years to really talk more and more with districts about thinking of Title IIA as a resource to support systems within the district, as opposed to being an end in and of itself. This graphic is going to be extremely familiar to all of you. And as I mentioned earlier, in this webinar today, we really are going to be talking about Title IIA and reflecting it through the continuous improvement process. We know that all of you are engaging in continuous improvement. So I just want to put out there that the reason for that shift is not because we don't think districts know what continuous improvement looks like. But we have a real opportunity with the reauthorization under ESSA to have a statewide conversation about continuous improvement and what our common understanding of it is. And so that's the reason for this, this reflection today. So we're going to start with talking about assessing needs for a few minutes. And again, we know that districts engage in this work. This is just our opportunity to have a conversation and develop some common vocabulary. So a comprehensive needs assessment is really a process. It's not an event, and that's something that we continue to share through all of our federal programs work. That it is more than just a one-time event. It's a process that allows you to identify strengths and opportunities within a school or district so that you can determine priorities based on the needs that you identify. That's the why for engaging in that comprehensive needs assessment process. And we do that by examining multiple sources of data. And sometimes, thinking about Title IIA, sometimes we see districts say that we've given our teachers a survey to find out what they need for professional learning, and that's how we identified our needs. And that is a key piece of data that's important, but it is just one source of data. It's really the multiple sources that make the comprehensive needs assessment process one that will really allow you to have a deep awareness of what your strengths and opportunities are. And we've talked about multiple sources of data over the years in our Title IIA technical assistance webinars. And these are not an exclusive list of data, but three big categories that are helpful to include as you go through that process. So student data, obviously, which does not just include academic data. We've got graduation data, discipline data, information about course participation. All of those things can give us some insight into student needs. Then perception data, that survey that I was talking about. Surveys are a critical way to gather data from your stakeholders, and really thinking about broadening that table to include potentially parents and students, to get their perspective as members of your district system. The TEL survey is one that we have access to every other year that can be valuable, and of course districts create their own internal surveys as well. And then that systems health data, that is really about looking at the systems at play in your district, and many of you are familiar by now, I think, with the Oregon Integrated Systems Framework, or the ORIS framework. You can see that little Mobius strip right there next to, on the right-hand side. It lists 5 evidence-based domains that are really key to healthy district systems. And it's a little small. I'm not sure if you can read them. So leadership is one, talent development, which is really our way of talking about professional learning and teacher leadership. Coordinated learning, that's really curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Stakeholder engagement, and inclusive policies and practices. So those 5 domains are described in the ORIS framework, and the department has developed a number of tools aligned to that framework, which I believe many of you have already engaged with, either through your work with Title I or maybe the SPDIG grants. In any case, these tools provide schools and districts with a way to sit down and have a conversation about those 5 domains and kind of assess their the state of things in each of those 5 areas. And so I've included a link here to the web page on our ODE website that has those resources. And I wanted to emphasize this as though, again, thinking back to that, to our goal of integration and cohesiveness. If your district has engaged with the ORIS needs assessment tools, that's data that you can use to inform the summary that you're going to provide for us in Title II around your comprehensive needs assessment process. So if we connect that back to what do we ask for in the Title II application? So in that needs assessment section, this is the place where you're going to summarize the needs assessment that your district has completed. We really want to emphasize that our hope is that district plans are not, or Title IIA plans, I should say, are not a plan for Title IIA funds, but instead they reflect the needs of the district that you're anticipating supporting through the use of 2A funds. So it's kind of, your 2A plan is kind of a microcosm of work that you're already doing in the district. You're simply sharing highlights of your district's needs assessment process here. You're not doing a special needs assessment for Title IIA. So you have 4 prompts in the 2A application that ask you about that comprehensive needs assessment process. It asks about the data that you looked at. It asks you to summarize what did you learn from looking at that data. It asks you to identify the prioritized needs. And again, these would be the needs, ideally, the needs that are already developed in the district plan that you're intending to support through your use of 2A funds. And then a brief description of the process for developing that plan. So we've always shared in the past that this isn't a special needs assessment for 2A. Just want to reinforce the idea that whatever process you're using, this part of the application is simply where you're summarizing that information for our 2A purposes. Charter schools deserve some special attention because it's important to remember in that needs assessment process that district-sponsored charter schools are district schools, and their data needs to be included in the analysis that's taking place at the district level. We always know that based on that data analysis, you might determine a need that is not necessarily going to reflect immediate impact on all of your educators. So for example, if you determine that K-3 reading is a need in your district, that's not going to have a direct immediate impact on your high school teachers, for example. And the same would be true for charter schools. Their data being included in your needs assessment does not necessarily mean that the prioritized needs that you identify are going to reflect all of their needs. However, it is important to try to find ways to consider how you can meet their unique needs. Charter schools are not private schools. They do not get an equitable service amount as our private school partners do, but they often have unique models or methods that need support. And so we've seen districts address this in several ways. Some districts actually create a line item for each of their charters and have chosen to identify, target some funds specifically for those schools to support the professional learning that they've identified. That's not required, but that is one way that you can work to address those unique needs of your charter schools. In other districts, we see districts actually specifically identifying charters as participants in a or several line items that they've included in their budget narrative. So again, just a reminder that we do want to make sure that charter school students and educators are receiving the same access to these resources because they are a part of the district. I'm going to pause there for just a moment. We've covered sort of the first section focusing on needs assessments, and I'm going to ask Tanya to let me know if there's any questions that have come up so far.
I don't see them in the chat.
Okay, so no questions in the chat. If anyone has a question, I'll pause for about 15, 30 seconds, let you type something in, and then we'll proceed. Okay, I don't see any comments coming through, so we'll go ahead and move on. So the second piece of the continuous improvement process that I want to draw some connection to Title IIA is around creating that strategic plan. And as I mentioned, ideally the district's plan for 2A is just part of the larger district plan for improvement that's being funded through Title IIA. And planning has a variety of levels of granularity to it, right? So this slide is really calling out a couple of those levels: priorities, goals, and strategies. And I included this in here because sometimes when we look at our Title IIA applications, we'll see priorities written really more like actions. And you've identified your needs and prioritized needs in your needs assessment, and now you're going to start telling us what your plan is. And so sometimes we'll see things like our priority is fully implementing AVID, or our priority is sending teachers to constructed meaning training. And those are powerful strategies that you can engage to support students, but priorities really describe where we want to go, but they don't necessarily tell us how we're going to get there. So for example, those two examples that I gave around AVID and constructed meaning training, the priority for those might be that we want to improve outcomes for English learners. That's where we want to go, and how we're going to get there, there are actually multiple things we're going to do to meet that priority. Goals, we know, need to be ambitious and rigorous and might take more than 1 year to meet. Most importantly, they need to be measurable, and we support those goals through strategies that we undertake. And that's really the work that we're going to do. And strategies should be those things that really can build the capacity and improve the practice of educators. And that's where you are going to see, that's the kind of information that you're going to communicate. That strategy level information is what you're going to communicate through the budget narrative section of the plan. We've been working a lot. The team that I work on is actually called the District and School Effectiveness Team, and so my work crosses both federal programs work and what used to be called school improvement work. And we've been talking a lot with districts about this idea of writing strategies as a theory of action. And if you're familiar with theories of action, you know that they use this if, then, and format, in which we describe what we're going to do, our evidence-based practice, as the if. If we do this evidence-based practice, then we're going to see this change in adult behavior, and we expect it to have this impact on students. This is a really valuable way to communicate what we're trying to do and help us really get clear on what is it we want to do and where do we think, what do we think we're going to see as a result. I didn't include this to say that you have to include a theory of action in your Title IIA application, but really just to point out that this process can help us get clear on what do we want to do and what do we think is going to be the result, and that can help us as we start to articulate our activities in Title IIA. So I've included an example here that would align with that priority of improving outcomes for English learners, just as an example to kind of articulate what that theory of action is looking for. Okay, so connecting again, trying to connect this back to the Title IIA application. We've done our needs assessment summary, right? And we've shared that information. Now we're in the budget narrative section, and this is where you're going to tell us what your plan is. And we have, for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at least, asked districts to communicate that information through a what, who, how process, where you tell us what is it that you are going to undertake. And if we think about that theory of action that we just discussed, the what is describing the actions that we're planning to implement, the strategy that we've determined. And we know that those actions need to be connected to a prioritized need. And we're just going to briefly ask you to briefly tell us what is the activity and what will staff know and be able to do. And that, if you think about the then part of the if, then, and, that's really the then. And then indicating in your description how the strategy meets the USED definition of professional learning. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. And then the who is who's participating, just giving us a sense of the number of people. And the reason that we ask for that information is to help us as we look at the direction we get from USED around determining reasonable and necessary. So if we see an expense that's a large expense, it helps us to know, gosh, this district is supporting 150 or 500 teachers with this one strategy, as opposed to 2 or 3. So defining professional learning, I shared this in our webinar last year, and we've included it in our guidance. And I know many of you have had conversations with your reviewers around this, this ask. The U.S. Department of Education has been very clear that with this shift towards thinking about systems, how to use Title IIA to support systems within districts, that professional learning is not one-day workshops or conferences. That does not meet the definition of effective professional learning. And so when you are thinking about professional learning, we know that professional learning comes in different shapes and sizes, and we know that job-embedded professional learning is really the most effective. We also know that conferences can play a role in an effective plan for professional learning. So all that to say that as you are describing the activities that you are and strategies that you are planning to engage in, finding a way to make it clear how those activities are ongoing and job embedded where appropriate is important. And so conferences can be part of an approvable strategy if they are part of a larger system. So they may be the springboard for an activity. You're going to send some folks out to be trained, bring them back, and have them engage in a train-the-trainer model. That tells us how the reach of that activity is more than just one event. You might be engaging staff in PLCs to follow up on that information. That tells us how it's ongoing and sustained. So we're going to be asking you to indicate to us how you are meeting that USED requirement. And you don't have to come out and make it its own line item. Just know that if it's not clear how it's ongoing, that's something your reviewer may ask you to clarify. Okay, I'm going to pause again here. Tanya's given me the shake of the head to say that she doesn't see any comments.
They're very quiet today.
Very quiet. All right. Well, we'll continue, and as questions come up, we'll go ahead and answer those. So the last piece, as I mentioned, when you're in the budget narrative, that's where you're telling us what your plan is, and you're giving us information on the what, the who, and the how. And the how is really what's happening in this final step, or the last step before you start over again in continuous improvement, which is the monitoring and adjusting. And it's really critical that we think about what are our expectations for the results of the professional learning that we're looking for. How will we know that it was effective? If we treat the sort of the evaluation and the measurement of professional learning as an afterthought or ignore it, there's no way of knowing whether our investment in that professional learning has paid off. And that's really what this is, right? It's an investment in your staff and in your district systems. So in that application, I talked about the what and the who. We also are asking you to give us some information on the how. How are you measuring impact? How will you know whether the strategy is generating the results that you expect? And last year, I believe, was the first year that we really asked districts to start thinking about this how in this way. And I know that many of you have engaged with your reviewer in questions about what we're looking for here. And again, it's really about how are you going to know whether your strategy is getting what you're hoping for. And so that's why you have to know what do you expect the outcomes to be? What do you expect the impact of that professional learning to be? And one way to think of it is, what is it you're trying to change? We know that the legislature often puts forth bills that become laws that are looking for outcomes, improved outcomes for students, as well they should, and that always needs to be our target. But we know that there's an interim step in most cases, which is outcomes for educators, and what are changes to practice that we're going to see for educators. So that might be what you're measuring. You are not necessarily always just measuring results for students. You may be measuring results for educators. In any case, thinking about what is it we're trying to change is one way to help think about how you're going to measure impact. I'd also say that it's important to keep in mind that the same measure is not necessarily the best fit for all strategies. And so as you are identifying your measures, being really intentional, as we would not ask students, we would not put in front of students a multiple choice test if we were measuring their performance on a performance task. It's the same idea here, is what is it that we're actually trying to measure, and do we have the right measure that fits? So in that spirit, we try to provide examples sometimes to kind of clarify for folks. Again, there is never a perfect example, and we're always working to improve them. But this example around foundational reading and intervention strategies is focused on improving teacher knowledge of those strategies in reading, and it's also focused on using data to monitor student progress. So it's identified how many teachers, it's identified what skills they're going to develop. It's indicated that they'll meet weekly within their PLCs, so we have a sense of how it's ongoing and meets that USED definition of effective professional learning. And then in terms of the impact, they've actually identified 3 different ways that they are going to measure impact. So one is around DIBELS progress monitoring. So they've got a measure for students. They're going to see improved student mastery. They've got a measure of observation data, and they're expected to see teacher instruction shifting to meet student needs. And they've also included the PLC notes to show that DIBELS data is in fact being used to inform planning and instruction. So they've got several measures, and they've articulated what they want to see from each of those measures. And that way, they'll be able to go back and know later whether or not they got what they were looking for. As a side note, a little plug, part of the monitoring process for Title IIA is asking you to articulate how you are measuring impact. And if you are putting that information in your Title IIA narrative, you can literally copy and paste that information to feed the questions that come from Title IIA monitoring around impact. Okay, Tanya's telling me there's a question.
Yes, so a question has come up about when and how do we submit a report from the 1819 Title IIA plan, and is it too late to make revisions to our 1819 plan? Okay,
so I'll start with the second part of the question first. No, it is not too late to make revisions. Anytime a district, and we'll cover that in a few minutes, talking about essentially what we call reconciling. So if you have determined that an activity can't take place, we had a situation one year with a presenter who got appendicitis and could not present the professional learning that was scheduled. So if you need to make a change, you would go in, and I am not as familiar with the district view of this, but my understanding is that once we've approved it, you would go in and essentially unsubmit it, make your changes, and then it gets you'd submit it again, and it would show up to us as a revision in progress, and so we would take a look at it. So no, it is not too late for 1819 to make those changes. The first part of the question was, how do we submit it?
So we're getting a couple other questions. Let me go back up. The first part was, when and how do we submit a report from the 1819 Title II plan?
Okay, I'm not sure what's meant by a report. You submit your Title IIA plan through the Secure District website. That's how we can see it to review it and approve it. If you're talking about monitoring, districts are selected to be monitored and would receive information about what and how to submit those materials. So if this person wants to, if you want to clarify a little more about what you mean by report, I'd be happy to take it further than that.
And then we also have, are we going to touch on private, we have a private school.
Oh, we're getting to private schools, yes.
Okay, so we'll hold on
to that one. Okay.
And then we have a request that goes back to the previous slide, just for a quick reread.
Okay, I'm assuming you're talking about the strategy. And we will post this, not only the webinar, but the PowerPoint on the website so that you can access it. Okay, and again, there are no perfect examples, but I wanted to try to share one that we felt showed all of the components that we're looking for. And here actually is one that was included in an email that I sent at the beginning of last year, highlighting, trying to show, this is an example, and I've highlighted in different colors what each of the components are. So the what is in yellow. Any place that you see yellow, this example is articulating the what. Any place that you see green is where we see the who. The purple shows the how they're measuring impact. And then the blue would be signs of, this is how we know that it meets the definition, the USED definition of professional development. And I'll probably send it out again this fall as well as a reminder. Okay, so a couple reminders for Title IIA. The one at the bottom there, I'll start with first because we just had a question about this. You absolutely can reconcile your application. You would do that when you have new activities to add, because we know that districts' plans change. So if you have a planned activity that was not conducted and something new is proposed in its place, we would definitely want you to revise it. Or if you're seeking to shift a significant amount of funds between approved items, that would be a place to shift. If we're talking minor amounts of money or changing a few numbers of people, I don't know that it's necessary to do that, but you can resubmit your narrative. What you cannot do is resubmit a carryover application. So once your carryover application is approved, because of the technical things that go on behind the scenes at ODE, an approved carryover, if you try to resubmit it, our system will not accept it and it will generate an error message. So if you need to make changes to an approved carryover, you would need to email me and let me know via email what it is you're changing, and I can file that email, which I do. We have several of those a year that happen. I can file that email and we're all set. But do not try to resubmit an approved carryover for review again, because it will generate headaches on your end and ours. Another couple reminders, if you have activities that you repeat from year to year, which we know that strategies may take several years of implementation to show results, we encourage you to continue to implement those strategies. If you're doing them from year to year, and we do have our reviewers read the same narratives from the same districts each year to help provide some continuity, you may be asked to identify how you know that strategy is working. What's your evidence that it warrants continued implementation? And again, if you've identified measures for how you're going to know whether you're getting where you want to go, then you'll have that at the ready. And then in terms of the object codes, this reminder is just that if you're including things like materials or supplies in your narrative, in your object codes, you should probably reference that in the narrative, because you'll get asked. Sometimes we get line items with substantial amounts of money for materials or supplies, but no reference to it in the narrative itself. And so if you include those, it's just helpful to the reviewer so they don't have to come back and ask you. Okay, private schools. Here we go. And I have Joni here to keep me honest. Joni and I have been working together, and before Joni, Russ and I, to really make sure that we have good communication between our two lenses. And Joni has done several webinars around private schools as they relate across federal programs. But the first and most important piece of that is consultation, that districts must annually notify private schools in their district of their eligibility to participate. And that does need to happen, like I said, on an annual basis to ensure that all students have access to these supports. We are recommending late February, early March as the sort of initiation of a cycle. And if you think about that cycle of continuous improvement, your consultation is really a cycle as well. I think it's safe to say. These are some of the key things to keep in mind around the verification of annual private school consultation forms. And Joni has a whole web page around private school participation that includes resources for districts and schools. And Joni, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add or say about consultation.
Just that the after consultation does take place, that the affirmation of consultation that can be found on the web page, it's also part of the transact forms, that needs to be sent to the department, to me, and I don't know if Sarah has my address, email address.
Yes, I do.
But each district has to provide the affirmation of consultation. That is new with the ESSA law. We did not require it the past few years, but it is mandated that those be sent into the department.
Okay, that's helpful. I've just written that on my notes to remember for next time.
Do you want the private school question now, or do you want to wait?
Let's go through the rest of the slides and see if it gets answered, and if not, then I'll take it. One of the things that Joni and I have talked a lot about is the kind of providing clarity or support around what are the roles and responsibilities of private schools and districts in this relationship. And so the private school's primary responsibility is to be in communication with the district regarding their school's needs and their plan for their use of their equitable share. So the private school does need to conduct a needs assessment and identify their own prioritized needs, and then provide to the district a plan for how 2A funds are going to be used. And they should be using that same what, who, how format, and that same requirement around the USED definition of professional development, making sure that it's ongoing, not a one-time thing. And then they would work with the district to arrange for billing and payment, because as we'll say several times throughout today, schools cannot be reimbursed directly for costs. The district is the fiscal agent, and costs for registering for conferences or travel or materials, all those things should be coordinated through the district. And inevitably each year we get a phone call either from a private school or a district saying, hey, we're asking to be reimbursed, and we have to deliver the bad news that that's not how it works. So please please understand when you see that I'm going to mention it several times, it's because it's really important that the district is the fiscal agent. In terms of district roles and responsibilities, the primary role of the district is to be the guide and the resource for the school regarding Title IIA, not unlike ODE's role in supporting districts, right? So the district should be working with the private school when they submit their plan and asking for any revisions or clarifications. That's perfectly reasonable for the district to be requesting from the school. The district is responsible for calculating the equitable share for each school, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They're going to review those activities to make sure that they meet 2A requirements. And then you're going to create a line item in your narrative for each of those schools, identifying when the consultation took place, and you're going to act as a fiscal agent for the school. We know that districts may be ready to submit their Title IIA narrative before private schools have completed their process of notifying the district on how they intend to spend their equitable service share. And so the district can always submit its narrative with a line item for each school, the amount for each school, and a placeholder that says, when the school shares its plan, we'll update our Title IIA narrative. So that should not hold up the district from submitting its narrative if the district is ready. Calculating equitable service amounts. This is something that we have continued to clarify, and with the passage of ESSA, some adjustments have been made that we've tried to be clear about communicating, and that is that primarily equitable service amounts are now based on the district's total allocation minus administrative costs. You can't withhold any of the other things that you used to withhold under NCLB, like class size reduction and that sort of thing. And we have a definition on the slide of kind of what we mean by administrative costs. But the key here is in bold. And that's to say that when you're calculating the equitable share, you can deduct administrative costs up to but not exceeding the district's indirect rate. You may have administrative costs that are greater than that. There are districts who have used their Title IIA funds to support the cost of a part of a role of someone to administer this grant, or an entire FTE in the case of large districts, because that's what's necessary to coordinate the work. And that is a perfectly reasonable use of Title IIA, and districts can continue to do that. However, you cannot deduct the entire cost of that person from the district's allocation before you calculate equitable share, because it does not cost the district that much money to engage in administration of the equitable share to the private schools. So you can deduct up to the amount of your indirect rate on that equitable services worksheet. So I just want to clarify that. We've had some questions about that, and again, it's been a learning curve on our end as well, and that is that withholding of up to the district's indirect rate is standard at ODE across multiple title programs. So I just want to clarify that you can use the funds that you consider reasonable and necessary to administer your program in the district, absolutely. You just can't deduct all of it before you provide the calculation for equitable share. Okay, lots of questions. All right, so there's my reminders about what's not allowable for private schools: salaries, benefits, substitutes, secular content only, and you can pay for partial payments for activities if it's a faith-based conference and there are activities that are secular in nature. Those are absolutely allowable. But districts may have to ask questions about that in order to assure that they're meeting that expectation. And then the needs assessment for the school is the school's needs assessment. It is not enough for the district to say we are going to include the private school in our professional learning. That is not the intention of what the equitable share. So private schools determine their needs, and then the district serves as a fiscal agent to help them implement the strategies that they are undertaking to meet those needs. And transferring funds, just a reminder that while it is allowable for districts to transfer funds between federal programs, and we saw districts doing that this year, that must be part of the annual consultation. Schools must be made aware, particularly if a district is seeking to move all of their funds and is no longer engaging in a program like Title IIA as they have in the past. They need to know that in their annual consultation, and they also need to be made aware that of which programs they are now eligible to participate in if Title IIA, for example, is no longer an option. Okay, Tanya, let's hear the question.
Okay, so this question came in earlier.
Yes.
And we may need a little clarification around it. But the question is, are we supposed to provide private school measurement information as backup to our academic year funding?
Wow. So if what you're asking is, do private school line items need to include how are they going to measure impact? The answer would be yes. I'm not sure, what was the last part of the question?
As backup to our academic year funding.
Yeah, I think I would need more. If my answer about do they need to include how they're going to measure impact, if that doesn't answer your question, please feel free to clarify and I'll try to come at it again. Okay, I'm going to do all of the private school questions, and then I have a reconciliation question. Okay. So don't forget to come back to that one.
We have one around, they did the consultation and had confusion on the Transact form, PCS01. Is it possible for the private schools to mark both boxes on the form indicating that they do want to participate with the district to talk about kids, but does not want to participate in services? Or do we force them to pick the second box if they do not want federal strings?
So they would work with the district just more informally on, working with kids, but not accepting the federal services, federal funding. I would say then check the no box. Okay. Just that they're not going to participate in whatever that title program is. But they might want to just informally talk to the district about programs the district might have.
Mm-hmm.
That is out.
Because it talks about participate with districts to talk about kids.
Yeah.
And we will have Joni's contact information.
Is right there.
Is right there.
There it is.
And so if you need additional information to clarify some of your questions or our responses, please, she will be happy to respond. Another one, what is a potential timeline for private schools to meet their responsibilities?
Well, private schools are no longer eligible for carryover. We're going to talk about the timeline for districts in just a few slides, but right now, private schools have to engage, use the funds essentially that are allocated to them through their equitable share by September 30th of the year after allocation. So you'll get an allocation in 2019 and they would have to use it by September 30th or engage in activities by September 30th of 2020. In terms of when they have to get it done, they need to give you a reasonable amount of time to review it and approve it. We have districts who don't submit their Title IIA applications until we've had some that are just coming in now in May, which is not best practice. And we know there are lots of reasons why that happens. So that's not a criticism, but it is to say that if you are submitting a narrative in May for activities that you've already engaged in, you're taking a chance that something that you're asking to do is going to be rejected. So the same would be true for a private school. They should give the district ample time to review it so they can say, yep, this looks good to go before you engage in activities, or you run the risk of not being able to be not reimbursed, but not being able to have that activity paid for because it's not allowable. So I hope that answers the question.
All right, another question. Why are districts charged with ensuring the private school plan is aligned with 2A requirements? Isn't this something the private school would work through with a reviewer?
Because the private school is getting its equitable share through the district is seen as the support to the private school in the process of Title IIA. We certainly, as reviewers, look at the private school line items, but as part of your relationship with the private school, we assume you're providing guidance and support. You are their conduit, for lack of a better word, to federal programs. So that would be my answer. If you have concerns about that process, don't hesitate to reach out and ask us those, and we'd be happy to support you as you support your schools.
And I do think it's fine in consultation with the private school, especially the ones that are new to 2A, to have a list of activities, allowable activities, so they've got more information and make sure that they're using their funds appropriately. So they don't always have to check with the district to make sure.
So are districts responsible for training the private school on how to do their needs assessment and prioritize their needs to meet the requirements?
No, they are not. We have some resources available for private schools for districts to share with private schools around, some forms that a private school could use to communicate that information to the district. The district needs to include a line item in their narrative for each of the private schools that is receiving an equitable share, and that line item needs to include the who, what, how information. Joni and I have been working together for the express purpose of informing private schools about Title IIA. We invited them to this webinar today so that they could get the same information. They'll have access to the same guidance. They may not have as much experience with this process as districts, and so we would imagine they might reach out with a question to a district around how to complete that, but it is not the district's obligation to walk them through all aspects of their planning.
Okay. And so we have a question going back to reconciling.
Okay.
Do we just review and resubmit on the district SIP page and contact our reviewer at ODE, or is there another step I've missed?
No, I believe what you've described is correct. So you would essentially pull your application back to the district level, which would put, on our end, it would put it as in progress, revision in progress. You would make your changes and resubmit it, and it would come back to us as revision under review for us to take a look at. I do think it's a nice idea to give your reviewer a heads up, because once they've approved an application, they aren't necessarily looking to see whether it's coming in. They're keeping track of which districts have been approved and which are still in process. And so if you've already been approved and you know you're going to make a change, it would probably be helpful to send your reviewer a heads up email that that's what you're doing. Okay, so Tanya's giving me the sign that we're caught up on questions. Here's Joni's contact information. She is an excellent resource and can help you out with any of those things you see listed here. Funding. I know last year we had some concern as to whether or not there would even be Title IIA funds available to districts. And so I think we're all happy to know that we will receive funding for 2019-2020. And we've gotten a preliminary allocation from USED, which looks very similar for the state to last year's, which means that we anticipate that any changes to district allocations for 2019-2020, any changes between what you got this year and what you'll get next year will be the result of changes in your district census poverty numbers. So as you might recall, starting in 17-18, they've changed the formula, and it became exclusively 80% poverty, 20% enrollment, and that hold harmless ceiling went away, and we had districts experience some serious reductions and others some significant increases. That has stabilized, and so what this is communicating is simply that we believe Oregon's allocation will stay the same, and so barring any major changes in your district, we anticipate that to mean that your funding should look quite similar. Once we know for sure what the final allocations are, I will post it on the ESSA allocations webpage as well as the Title IIA webpage. I know that the timeline for getting you that information is terrible, and I apologize. I have to work with the dates and when we're given the information, and I appreciate your patience. And please know that as soon as I have that information, I will post it, but it's generally not until July. Timeline for funds. Somebody was asking about the timeline for private schools. So just for district funds, the funds in total are available to districts for 27 months. So that means beginning July 1 of the allocation year and ending September 30th, 2 years later. Any funds that are not obligated by September 30th of 2020 will become what we call carryover funds. And then any activities funded through those remaining carryover funds must be completed by September 30th of 2021. In terms of some key dates, the application for funds for next year will open approximately mid-August. I'll be sending emails on the Title IIA listserv. And then September 30th of this year is the end of the initial period for the 18-19 allocation. So anything that you don't obligate is going to turn into carryover for on November 15th. We're asking for a due date of November 1st for your next year's applications. Obviously, if you can get them in sooner, great. We know you also have other federal programs that you need to submit applications for, so we try to be sensitive to that. And then a reminder about consultations with private schools happening as early as possible to give everyone a chance to plan. A whole bunch of resources for you to access. Our webpage, our listserv. Hopefully you've all gotten the information that the listserv platform has changed. I've been sending out, and I'm sure some of you have gotten multiple emails from different listservs that you belong to announcing that information, but we'll now exclusively be using the GovDelivery platform for the listserv. So if for some reason you're not signed up for that, you can go to the Title IIA webpage and get yourself on that list. If you were on the original listserv list, you have been transferred to GovDelivery. I'll be sending out an email about this webinar using GovDelivery. If you do not get it, if you believe that you are on the listserv and we're on the old one and you don't get the new email, please email me and let me know so we can make sure that you're on that listserv. Lots of resources though here for you to use, and I've added the continuous improvement planning guidance link that I shared earlier in the webinar. Do we have any remaining questions, Tanya?
No new ones as of right now.
Okay, so I'm going to pause one more time to see if there are any other questions that have not been answered or have popped up since I talked about allocation. Okay, great. Well, I can hardly believe it that we've actually made it just exactly to 12 o'clock. I want to really honor your time and appreciate you spending it with us this morning. Again, this will be posted on the Title IIA webpage so that you can access it for future reference. As always, if you have questions, please reach out to your reviewer. Rendy and Suzanne are our two Title IIA reviewers that have worked with us over the last for now almost 5 years, and they can answer questions better than I can about your specific application. But always don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions, and we look forward to supporting you in the upcoming year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.